Futility illustrated from nature. What benefit do people get from all the effort which they expend on earth? A generation comes and a generation goes, but the earth remains the same through the ages. The sun rises and the sun sets. It hurries away to a place from which it rises again. The wind goes to the south and circles around to the north. Round and round the wind goes, and on its rounds it returns. All the streams flow into the sea, but the sea is not full, and to the place where the streams flow, there they will flow again. All this monotony is tiresome. No one can bear to describe it. The eye is never satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear ever content with hearing. What exists now is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing truly new on earth. Is there anything about which someone can say, "Look at this, it is new"? It was already done long ago, before our time. No one remembers the former events, nor will anyone remember the events that are yet to happen. They will not be remembered by the future generations.
Well, good morning, one and all. It's a pleasure to be here, and though we're small in number, I'm certain the Lord will speak to us this morning. You may have noticed, and it's pretty obvious because it's up there right now, that even though this is a series on Lamentations, I've chosen, at least to start, with a scripture that was written certainly not by Jeremiah, almost certainly by Solomon, and about 450 years before Lamentations was written. But you've got to start somewhere, so we're actually even going to go back further in the Bible in this as we go along, and you might notice that as well if you're paying attention. So the first thing we've got is Solomon aging, and I think reflecting on life. And I think that's something which we tend to do as we get a little older. I don't know about that yet. I haven't managed to achieve that, but sooner or later it has to happen. And he's looking back, I think, on perhaps having been with his father when his father David died. And that's a moving experience. I know I was with my dad when he died, and it was wonderful. In fact, I'm going to tell you, this is not in the sermon, actually I haven't got any notes, so who cares? Dad died about just after 6 o'clock in the evening, and about midday, got a message from Mum, and she said, "Look, Dad wants you to be here," because he was up in the hospital. So I got in there. At about 3 o'clock, Dad took a deep breath, and his final words were, "Jesus saves." Now, it's a wonderful experience when a man of faith goes to be with the Lord. And so Solomon's looking back, and I guess he's thinking of all the things that his father David achieved. You know, he'd unified Israel. He'd brought it together as a nation. He'd built a magnificent palace, but God had said to him, "Don't build the temple." But he got everything ready for Solomon to build the temple so that God would have a house as well as the king's. And I guess he's thinking, well, hang on. Dad went into the ground like everybody else before him, and all this stuff stayed here. What was the use of all the effort that he put in? Looking back on it, somebody else gets it. He couldn't keep it. It's gone. And so I'm getting old. This is Solomon, by the way, not me. I'm getting old, and one of these days, Rehoboam, who is my son, but I'm not terribly confident in him, he's going to get it all. Now, what's he going to do with all those wives that I've collected, all the horses, all the gold? What's the point? What is the point? And that's why he said, what benefit do people get from all the effort that they expend on it? A generation comes and a generation goes. Now, that's actually a good thing, because he says at least another generation comes. And that's the way God's organised it. But then he says the earth remains the same. And then he goes on to look at a few things. Now, there's some amazing things that he actually notes here, but unfortunately, he doesn't understand everything behind them. We understand a bit more nowadays. But let's have a look. Sun rises and sets and hurries away back. So he doesn't actually understand that the earth is spinning on its axis. He thinks the sun is moving. But that's fine. That was the understanding of the time. There's no problem with that. The wind goes to the south and circles around to the north and so on and so forth. And then all the streams flow into the sea, but the sea is not full. And then they sort of start back at the top and do it all again. So he's actually looked at about 3 of the great cycles that we have on this earth, which sustain life. Now, I'll just say a little bit about the sun, right? One of the things that happens with the sun is its apparent rising place moves. And so does the time of its rising. Now, I'm going to use my hand to illustrate this, right? The Earth is actually spinning on an axis of about 23 degrees to the sun. It's rather hard to picture, but there it is. Now, what I've got here is the 21st of June, right? The sun's here, right? 21st of June, the Earth's there. This is the South Pole. And so the South Pole is actually pointing a bit away from the sun. They don't actually see the sun there for 3 or 4 weeks on end. Well, that's actually out at Scott Base, which is about 1,350 kilometres away from the South Pole. And we see the sun rising way north. And it's also the shortest day because the sun rises rather late. Now, we go around the sun. Here we go, right? We're going around the sun. Now you can see that the North Pole and the South Pole are actually around about the same place relative to the sun, which is still here, right? And so that's 3 months later, the equinox. And the South Pole and the North Pole. Right, now we come around here, and I've got a bit dodgy here. But what happens is we end up with the North Pole now facing the sun instead of the South Pole. And so they get the shortest, anyway, it's the other way around. And they get the shortest day when we get the longest day on the 21st of December. And so we've got this thing, and what happens is we see the sun rising further and further south as the time goes by. And so we're getting seasonality coming out of the sun as well. When we get to the 21st of December, it all starts going back again. Boom. And so that's part of what Solomon had actually observed, that there's something going on with the sun, and, it's all changing around. He also notices that the wind goes here, there, and everywhere. Now, in New Zealand, northerly wind, it's a warmer wind, comes in over the sea, picks up moisture, clouds. If the wind goes around to the south, colder, the clouds, so the water tends to condense, and so we get rain. So that's part of that sort of cycle that's going on as well. Now, what's the other thing he talks about? He talks about the streams flowing. Same thing there. Rain, streams, ocean, evaporation. Great. There's another great cycle too, which he doesn't mention, and that's the carbon cycle. Absolutely essential for life on Earth. At the centre of it is a gas called carbon dioxide. And we breathe out almost a kilogram of carbon dioxide each, every day. How do we do that? Well, we do it as a result of eating food and breathing oxygen. Where does the food and the oxygen come from? It comes from plants which take the carbon dioxide, take energy from the sun, take water from the ground, and produce carbohydrate and give out oxygen. And so we've got this incredible cycle that just goes round and round and round. How did that happen? Well, people who believe in nature and nature alone will tell you it just happened. It's an accident. The Bible tells us a different story and says that God put these things in place. Now, and they're going to stay in place, by the way, until God says enough is enough. Right? Those things are there. And Solomon noted these things. Now, I just want to say a couple more things. I don't normally wear a watch. I bought this watch on a boat, actually, in 2015, because we were sailing around somewhere, and the time kept on changing, so I needed a watch. My phone wasn't keeping up, so I bought a watch. It's a good watch, but if I told you that this sort of just happened by accident, that somehow a bit of iron and chromium got together and made stainless steel, and you'd say I was a lunatic. But the wrist on which it is being worn, which is hugely more complex than my watch, we will accept happened by chance. Interesting, isn't it? But don't argue with me about it. You see, the beginning of the Bible says that God made all things. And there's many, even in the church, who say, well, that's just some shepherds sitting around a campfire having a bit of a yarn and wondering how we got here. Well, let me tell you that Jesus quoted from the first 2 chapters of the Bible. So you're not arguing with me. You're arguing with him. He believed them. And so don't bother about me trying to prove it. Just be careful about who you're arguing with. Now he goes on, Solomon. He says, the eye is never satisfied with seeing, nor the ear ever content with hearing. I'm going to come back to that. We'll just skip over that, but we'll do a bit more on that. And then we've got all these things. What exists now is what will be, so on and so forth. Nothing ever changes. There's nothing really new. What happened a long time ago, etc., etc. And no one remembers the former events, nor will anyone remember the events that are yet to happen. They will not be remembered by the future generations. Well, all that can be summarised by somebody who said, somebody much smarter than me, they said, all we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. That's interesting. That's about people never really getting the message about life. So I said something about, we'll come back to the eye is never satisfied and the ear never content with hearing. I'm going to just pick up on the eye. And we're going to Genesis 3. And I'll start with an apology. I have used Genesis before, and instead of saying Adam and Eve, which is what the Bible calls them, I said our first parents. I apologise for that. All right? The Bible calls them Adam and Eve, and that's who I should call them. Full stop. When the woman, who happens to be Eve, saw the tree, this is the tree of the knowledge between good and evil. It was good for food, was attractive to the eye, and was desirable for making one wise. She took some of the fruit and ate it. She also gave some of it to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. And then what does it say? Their eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. What happened was that they moved from spiritual knowledge, spiritual eyes, a spiritual world, to a natural world. Now they saw the natural rather than the spiritual. And this is the beginning of God having to work out his plan of salvation, how to rescue people from this situation where all they saw was the natural. Why did he want to work out such a plan? Well, because in that plan he could show his love, ultimately. And so begins the process. And the first person I want to remind you of was Abraham. He was called by God. God revealed himself as the one and only God, an invisible God, but a spiritual God. On to Isaac, to Jacob, eventually the children of Israel down into Egypt, where they grew into a nation. After about 400 years, they come out of Egypt, led by Moses. The moment they got out of Egypt, well, a few days afterwards, God calls Moses up a mountain to meet with him. There's evidence that God is there. Fire at night, smoke during the day. And what do the people do? Straight away they say, make us a god. And so Moses' brother Aaron built a golden calf for them to worship. They wanted to see their God. They wanted to experience their God physically. As time went by, they finally got into Israel, where Israel is now. The same sort of thing happened. The book of Judges. Fall away from God, get into trouble. Fall away from God, get into trouble, be rescued, fall away. The pattern goes on until eventually the time of the kings. Saul, David, and then Solomon. That's where we started. A good time for Israel because they were worshipping God. But after Solomon, things started to fall apart again. And they started worshipping idols. Part of Israel followed a guy called Jeroboam rather than Rehoboam. Jeroboam had been in exile in Egypt. What did he do? He built them some golden calves to worship. And so the nation started worshipping again, worshipping the natural rather than worshipping the spiritual. And after about 450 years of this, God has had enough. And he says, if that's what you want, that's what you can have. And that's the time of the Lamentations, when the nation has been pillaged by Babylon, taken away. And they're starving because there's a time where they've been surrounded by the enemy and just left to rot. And so here's what they say. This is chapter 4 of Lamentations. Alas, gold has lost its lustre. Pure gold loses value. Jewels are scattered on every street. The precious sons of Zion were worth their weight in gold. Alas, now they're treated like broken clay pots made by a potter. The gold hadn't actually lost its lustre. It was still shiny, but it just had no value. And it had no value because there was nothing to buy with it. They depended on being able to buy stuff, but there was no stuff to buy. There's the origin of the saying, worth your weight in gold, by the way, so I'm told. The precious sons of Zion were worth their weight in gold. But now they've been treated like broken pots, thrown out, no use whatsoever. What else happens? The infant tongue sticks to the roof of its mouth due to thirst. Little children beg for bread, but no one gives them even a morsel. Those who once feasted on delicacy are now starving to death in the streets. Those who grew up wearing expensive clothes are now dying amid garbage. They're in the garbage heap looking for food, but there's none. No point relying on the physical when it fails. And the prophet says, those who die by the sword are better off than those who die of hunger. Those who waste away, struck down from lack of food. And this is a verse that really hit me. The hands of tender-hearted women cooked their own children, who became their food when my people were destroyed. They had failed to look to God. They had looked to the natural. And here are the consequences. Absolutely devastating. Neither the kings of the earth nor the people of the lands ever thought that enemy or foe could enter the gates of Jerusalem. But it happened due to the sins of her prophets and the iniquity of her priests who poured out in her midst the blood of the righteous. You know, it's easy for us to say that it's the priesthood that did it. But I'm reminded that in Revelation 1:6, that we're told that we are now, by Jesus, appointed as a kingdom of prophets and priests. And so we are responsible. Ultimately, we, God's people, are responsible for where this world is going. And then finally, and this goes right back to the eyes again, our eyes continually failed as we looked in vain for help from our watchtowers. We watched for a nation who could not rescue us. Who was that nation? They'd called upon Egypt, the nation that had enslaved them right back at the beginning. They said, come and rescue us. Full circle. Exactly what Solomon was talking about. Things come full circle. And what else were they doing? Our very life breath, the Lord's anointed king, was caught in their traps, of whom we thought, under his protection, we will survive among the nations. See, they were looking to a king, their own king, a man, a mere man, to rescue them. They were continuing to look to the physical, to the natural. They would not see beyond it. Well, where do we go to this? I just want to wind this all up by saying, we've just that last verse. We just had a change of government. Will it make a difference? There will be some changes. I guess there'll be some social changes, perhaps material changes, some financial changes. Who knows? Time alone will tell. But governments don't actually change the real problem that man has. Again, we're looking to the natural. We need to look beyond that. What I've tried to show you is how Israel failed. They'd been given the task of showing God to the world. But they failed in that task. They failed miserably. But despite that, somehow, miraculously, God maintained a remnant among them. And there were sufficient people who still faithfully sought God, so that when the time was right, Jesus could be born because in and through that nation. The Son of the invisible spiritual God took on flesh so that he could be seen for a time. And again, we go to Revelation chapter 1, and this is verse 5. And what is Jesus called? He's called the faithful witness. Where Israel had failed, Jesus succeeded in showing us who God really is. And now it's our turn. He calls us to be witnesses as well. Firstly, to follow him, and then to show others how this is supposed to be. My question to you is, will we as a people continue to follow the things of this earth? Fame, fortune, fashion, whatever. Or will we stand up and be counted? Will we be ones who, in a dark world, shine for Jesus? He needs us to show the world who he is. Now, we're just going to finish there. I'm not going to make it. Chantel, bring your team up here. Come on, up you come. Now, can you just grab a microphone, please, Chantel? Because while you get yourselves ready, you got one there. You don't have to grab it. It's standing there waiting for you. That's pretty good. Okay, now we're going to sing a little Sunday school song. Certainly one that I sang when I was a kid, which is a couple of days ago now. Now, Jesus wants me for a sunbeam. Did you ever sing that as a kid in Sunday school?
I did not.
Now, we were talking about this before, and it's an interesting little ditty, isn't it? It's been a bit of a challenge for you, has it?
Yep.
I mean, yeah, a bit of a challenge, but fun.
It's fun.
Fun
Yep.
learning it? Okay. Now, hey, look, can I just have a show of hands? Who actually sang this in Sunday school as a kid? Yeah, there's a definite cut-off. See, it went out of vogue, I would say, about 50 years ago. Just looking around. Or maybe. Yeah, now, I'd say I'm not certain whether it's a musical classic or, for that matter, theological classic. But why we're going to sing this is that I want you guys, people, to remember that Jesus wants us to shine, to be different. Right? Sorry, I'm going to just say, if don't complain about sinners sinning. It's their job. Right? But if Christians aren't shining, that's a problem. So this week, for the rest of your life, in fact, do not be the failure that Israel were. Remember that we serve the faithful witness and go out there and shine for him.